All right, here we go. My name is Carson from MBCM, Mennonite Brethren Church of Manitoba. I'm here with Cullen.
Hi.
And I'm here with David.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're going to speak with Karla Braun, the associate editor of the MB Herald. She's going to speak to us about cycling, commuting, and community. Cullen, what is the craziest mode of transportation you've ever utilized?
Craziest was probably last summer. I was in the Burmese jungle in Myanmar, and we actually got to take elephants to one of the villages. It was about a 3-hour ride on elephant back.
Wow.
In really wooden, hard cages. I know it sounds like we were trapped, but we weren't. Well, I guess we were kind of trapped in these uncomfortable situations. And it was also raining on top of that, so it wasn't the most glorious ride.
Well, life is tough. Now, some people can get car sick. Some people can get seasick. Did anyone at all get elephant sick?
There were elephant sick people. I was okay for the most part.
So this is a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real issue, and
Yeah.
I think there needs to be more awareness about elephant sickness.
We need to just track down the right guest for that show.
That's right.
You better get on it. David, what's the craziest vehicle, mode of transportation? What is the craziest way you've gotten from point A to B?
Trying to think of that. On one trip a couple summers ago, I took a car, a train, a stranger's car, a boat, and my own feet to get to Vancouver Island. So that was pretty diverse. That was pretty good.
Yeah, you guys both had me beat, as usual. I have nothing completely out of the ordinary.
Come on.
Well, because I still live my life 20 years behind, I can still think about my high school days and how I would get to and from school. I had a friend named Tark. He's much larger than I am, and he had a killer bicycle whose handlebars seemed to be built just for me, for a guy my size. Nice. So I would get to and from high school on his handlebars. And what made that a little strange, despite the differences in appearance between he and I, was the fact that we'd have to haul a lot of stuff occasionally. I can remember one afternoon going home in the winter with 2 hockey sticks and 2 hockey nets while I'm sitting on his handlebars and Tark is pedaling away. Not too long after that, he inherited his brother's old Jeep, and we were able to get around like most everybody else, and so that's I guess my strangest mode of transportation. Now that we've covered all that, I think we should get right down to business.
Yeah.
David, you're going to interview Karla for us. Let's get on with it.
So today we're joined by Karla Braun, B-R-A-U-N.
Excellent.
Who's in the office today with us from the Herald. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So Karla, around the office space here, you have a reputation for being quite the bicycle aficionado. When did you start biking?
So first of all, it's funny that I'm seen as this biking person, which is sort of an athletic kind of idea, because anyone I went to high school with would just roll on the floor laughing at the characterization of me as athletic. But that said, my biking did begin in high school or even before that. I lived in the country. My friends lived a few miles away, and so it was a reasonable way to get to their house. You hop on your bike, you go to your friend's house 3 miles away, go for a swim, hop on your bike and go home, and you need to swim by the time you get home again. But that was strictly pragmatic, which really characterizes why I bike. It is pragmatic. I spent a year in the Netherlands, which is kind of where it starts now, as biking as commuting, where in the Netherlands, of course, that is the way that a large percentage of the population gets around. So for the first 6 months, I was on a 1-year exchange program there in 2 different placements. The first 6 months I lived with a host family and took all modes of public transportation. The next 6 months lived with a different host, and there I worked in the same town where I lived, and I took the bike to work every day down one of the only streets in the country. This is of course an exaggeration. One of the only streets in the country that did not have a bike path and was quite heavily trafficked. So it was good training to come back home to Winnipeg. and start biking here. So yeah, I just moved to Winnipeg when I got back from the Netherlands and felt that I wanted to bring that kind of urban style living home with me and just make that my new normal here. So I started out just going short distances. I lived in the West End and worked downtown, and so that was what I did. But gradually realized, that this worked as transportation, that waiting for the bus is frustrating for a bit of a control freak kind of person. Don't like buses, being late, don't like not being in control of my schedule, and that's really what made it happen. And every time I needed to go somewhere that was farther away than I had been before, I would grumble and complain, but I would do it, and I was always capable of doing so. And so eventually it starts to reinforce in your head, this is possible.
There you go. So what would be the longest bike commute you've had to do to an event or something in town?
Probably I went to pick up some Love Winnipeg t-shirts from the lady's house, which is at the end of the world, out by Eastview. So I went straight from the office to, it's like Fox something was the name of the street. I believe it is the last street before the perimeter in the North Culloden area there. So that was probably one of my longest commutes, just like from door to door for one particular trip.
That's pretty good. See, I wouldn't imagine doing that at the beginning, but after even biking about 6 months, I've been doing it. You start to just have a different imagination for what's actually accessible by bike, which is kind of cool. You mentioned in Europe it's pretty common to have bike lanes, there's a biking culture and everything. How's Winnipeg's bike scene? Is it similar? Are you frustrated by it?
I'm frustrated by Winnipeg's bike scene, yes. They're doing increasing amounts of bike infrastructure, which is really great. The frustrating thing about it is that there's no continuity. So they'll build a 5-block bike lane and say, look at this, we're so fantastic, we made bike infrastructure. It's not very long and it's not continuous. That is the greatest frustration, is the lack of continuity. The bike lane is beautiful, but how do you get onto it and how do you get off of it without having some really awkward interface with traffic? That's Winnipeg's problem.
So biking in itself seems to be mostly an activity, but for some people it becomes more of a lifestyle. How would you describe your relationship to cycling?
I would agree that it becomes a lifestyle because it is so different from how the majority of people commute. You just hop in your car and go wherever you want to go as a car commuter. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It doesn't take a whole lot of advanced planning. You don't have to factor in the weather. With cycling, you do have to plan ahead. You do have to factor in the weather. You do maybe have to bring a change of clothes. So yes, because there is so many different components to it, it takes longer. It takes some effort. Like, you have to have energy to get from point A to point B. I don't choose to frame myself as a cyclist, but I find I have taken on that identity because I realize my view of the world is so different because of it. My view of distances, how long it takes to get from one place to another, how reasonable it is to do that, or how much you can accomplish in one day. When I use the CoOp car to run errands, I'm always thinking to myself, this is so easy. How much you can get done and how quickly you can get from point A to point B or do several things all at once is really different with a car. But I appreciate the more human pace that it forces me to have, that I can't run around like a crazy person doing all kinds of things because I just can't move that fast. I go exactly as fast as I have the energy for at that moment. I am affected by and aware of and constrained by whatever the weather conditions are in the world that God has created and the way that our human interactions affect that. I'm right there in the midst of it, experiencing it. I am experiencing also what's going on the street, in the community around me in a different way because someone's chatting on the sidewalk or I see a friend, like I can hear their voices, I can call out, I can interact with them. Granted, I usually don't. But yeah, you just experience the world in a whole different way because you're moving at a different pace, able to interact. You know, if it's raining, you get wet. it's snowing and cold, you get snowed on and cold. You experience how loud the road is when it's raining and how quiet and muted everything is with the fresh snow. It's really beautiful.
That reminds me one day when I was biking home from work during the rain, and there was like one other person who was caught in this downpour, and at a stoplight we're like, hey, you're biking too, and gave a high five, and there's this little incidental human contact happening along the way. It's kind of nice.
There's an instantaneous camaraderie that happens, right? Especially, I find, especially in winter. In summer, many people bike, and in summer, people kind of fall into camps. There's the hipster skinny jean fixie types, and then there's the mountain biking family types, and then there's the sort of hippie granola old comfort biking. Everyone falls into these different categories, and we all kind of look askance at each other. But in winter, we're all just like, yes, brother, sister, you're out here in the cold with me.
The camaraderie, yeah, totally. This car co-op you mentioned earlier, can you tell us about that a bit?
Oh, the car co-op is very exciting. It has been growing by leaps and bounds, so I'm not the only one who thinks it's fantastic. I think it started in 2009. I must have heard of such a thing before they started advertising in my neighborhood. The concept is, there's some statistics that I don't know what they are, but it's a fairly large number, that like 80% of your car's lifespan is spent parked. Like, how, you drive it to work every day. It takes you 15 minutes to maybe an hour at the top most for people here in Manitoba. Other areas I realize have longer commute times, but here most people don't commute for more than an hour. You sit at work for 8 hours, so your car is just parked there in the parking lot, and then you drive it home 15 minutes to an hour. Maybe you run an errand in the evening, or several errands, but again, probably you're talking 15 minutes to an hour of those commutes as well. So the cars are just spending a whole lot of time sitting. So the concept of a car co-op is, since the car just sits around all the time, why don't we share cars so that they spend less time sitting and more time being used? So it's a computerized system. Each car that the car co-op owns has a particular spot where it is always parked. The members, you buy into the car co-op for $500. You become a member. You get a number. You get an account. You log on to the computer system and choose which car you want to use. Book the time that you want to use. You have an electronic fob that allows you to get into the vehicle. The keys are left in the car, and so you use it during the time that you need. You get billed for your time. You get billed for your kilometers. So any given trip feels a tad more expensive than when you own a car, right? Because you're paying for the time in addition to that. But as a single person, as a woman who's not that mechanically inclined, I really appreciate not having to maintain the vehicle, having all the privileges of usage and no responsibility to do the work, to store it, to maintain it, any of that. I just use it when I need and walk away.
Yeah, that's helpful. Do you have any idea how many members this co-op has?
I do, because they're currently doing an investment drive. I just got an email about it last night and found out they have more than 500 members at this point and 18 cars, which is actually ahead of what their projected expansion plan was. They were expecting to only have, I think, 12 cars at this point, 11 or 12, and 300 members. So they're way ahead of what they were hoping.
That's fantastic. And if anyone's interested in learning more about the co-op and how to sign up, go to pegcitycarcoop.ca, and there's more information there as well as contact info to get more in touch. Our office recently took part in Winnipeg's Bike to Work Week. Could you tell us a bit of how you were involved in that?
This past summer in June, I had the idea, why don't we host a pit stop, which is basically set up a tent and a table and offer something to passersby. I thought this is a fantastic opportunity to do outreach in a more organic way, rather than, and yes, as an office, granted a church organization, but an office, perhaps it's not our responsibility to do outreach, but why not? So I just thought, as Christians, what an opportunity to do outreach rather than setting up our own program and trying to convince somebody to come. Let's join an initiative that's already happening with people in our city, showing that church people can also care about this thing, in this case, the environment and healthy communities, healthy bodies, healthy communities, healthy people, all of these great things that we can associate with bicycle commuting. So we're showing that we care about this. We're taking part in something, we're bringing volunteer hours to something where they are needed. It's also an opportunity to get to know people in our neighborhood, to get to know other cyclists who come by. We contacted FaithWorks because they have an office just down the street, and this River Heights neighborhood is their church congregation's neighborhood. So we said, we're doing this, we'd love to have you come join us, because these are the people who could potentially go to your church. So this is another way that you could possibly meet them. So I was super excited about this way of doing outreach in a super organic way that isn't us trying to drag people into our church, but just joining what's already going on in the community, adding value to the community, and while we're there, being able to say, hey, we're a church.
So I've noticed throughout the interview that you are good with words. You're maybe what you would call a wordsmith. Tell us a little bit about your role in communications and why do words matter so much?
It all comes down to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is a hypothesis, and some would argue with it. The basic premise is that language affects culture, and culture affects language. There's a bit of a symbiotic relationship. The part that people disagree with is the idea that we can't think thoughts that we don't have words for. So that's kind of taking the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to its extreme. But in its general sense, I think we can agree that you think in the terms that you have available to you. So the way that we talk does affect the way that we see things. And how this is important in the church is often a very controversial area with things like pronouns, male and female. How do we talk about God, but how do we talk about others? How do we talk about human beings? That's a contentious one. When you say man, does it mean men or does it mean humanity in general? Well, yes, we all understand it means humanity in general. But there's the word man does mean a male person. And so when you hear the word man, the image that comes to mind is generally the typical type, which is a male person, which means that for a lot of people reading the Bible or hearing a sermon or any sort of address in which humanity is referred to as man, in which a given person is referred to by male pronouns, they're picturing the typical type, which is a male, and so you don't really include yourself as a female, as part of that group, which I suppose if you're saying bad things about human beings or talking about their foibles, maybe it's convenient to not include yourself. But it's terribly unfortunate if you're not seeing yourself as part of the humanity that Jesus loves and died for example. And it's also, words are important in terms of singleness and in terms of people feeling a part of the church, to shift a bit away from the male-female, but to talk in terms of family. It's important how we choose our words because people will feel invited or included based on that. I wrote an article a couple of years ago on being single, and it was published in the Herald. And just before my article came out, one of my friends at church had given a sermon on teaching children about money. And she came to me after my article came out and she said, "Oh, Karla, I'm so sorry. I didn't think about you. Did you feel excluded as a single person because this was a topic about kids and families?" And I stopped and thought about it, and well, no, I hadn't felt excluded at all, and instantly realized that she had instinctively done something which is what we need to do, but which happens fairly rarely in churches, I think, is that she hadn't called the sermon, and throughout the sermon hadn't talked about it in terms of teaching your children about money. It was teaching children about money, talking to kids about money. So it wasn't focused on how you parents with your 2-children dog, minivan, and soccer league can talk to your children about money. It was, these are ways in which adults, talk to children. And so it could be how aunts talk to their nieces and nephews. It could be how grandparents talk to their kids. It could be about how mentors talk to their little brother, little sister that they're mentoring. Everyone is a part of this project, and as a family of Christ, as the body of Christ in the church, we are family together, right? Jesus was approached and told that his mother and sisters were there to see him, and he said, "Who are my brother and sisters?" They are, I guess sisters weren't actually part of that quote. He said, "They're those who follow the words of God." So in our evangelical churches in Canada, we tend to focus on nuclear family units as though that is the sanctified holy way that God has called us to be, when in fact Jesus talked about the new family that we have as the body of Christ. That's where our allegiances and our ties are. Not that we forget our biological family, but it doesn't. The nuclear family isn't the holy unit where salvation happens. It's in the family of the church.
You mentioned that language changes all the time, and especially with the younger generation, you see a sort of insider language happening, especially on the internet or through texting, new words being made up all the time that nobody really understands. Not those on the outside anyway. But there's actually a similar thing that happens in the church too, right? This idea of church Christianese language or insider language. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. The word missional is one example of a word that, boy, can anyone really define it? And even mission, which has a definition or had a definition, is used so broadly, which is, I think, partly where this missional comes from. We want to use it in every possible way, which, in my opinion, renders it meaningless after a while. Like, what does it even mean when we talk about our mission statement, and then we have our mission as our sense of what we're called to do, and then it's also about what motivates us, and mission, the idea of foreign mission, going out. We have so many ways that we use it, and it's always a safe word. Oh, mission. Mission this, mission that. We can use it as a verb, we can use it as a noun, we can use it as an adjective. There's so many ways, and nobody has any idea what we're talking about anymore, but we all smile and nod and feel holy.
It's almost as if tagging that word on legitimizes whatever you're talking about. Yeah.
Right, and we all feel like we're now agreeing about what we're talking about, but none of us could actually we couldn't really define what we mean by it, or we would all come up with a completely different definition. And when we're talking about being missional, wanting to live our faith in a way that affects our daily life and is a witness to those around us, insider language is not a witness. It's a stumbling block, and creating this whole vocabulary for people inside the church is convenient to have a shorthand inside the church, but is, again, a stumbling block, a wall for those coming from no particular experience with the church. They don't have a clue what we're talking about, and is a stumbling block for ourselves because we become so cultured to that language, to that shorthand, that we can't define it anymore either. But what do I mean? I don't know. What is the gospel? I'm not really sure. I just keep on using this word. It's great. It gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. What, you want me to explain it? That's a very unfortunate situation to find ourselves in. So I think it's quite important as Christians that we really be aware of our insider language that we use, and be careful to ask ourselves, do we know how to define this? What would we say to someone with no background in the church? How do we explain these concepts without using these comfortable jargon words that we have?
So let's say I'm totally convicted by what you said. I want to repent of my Christianese. Where do I start?
Repentance is a good place. And repent and critical thinking is the next step. I just read something today, probably on Facebook. attributed to someone who may or may not have been legitimate. I think it was C.S. Lewis, but who knows whether he said it or not. But if you can't explain your highfalutin idea in words that the ordinary person can understand, maybe you don't actually understand your highfalutin idea. So if we can't use normal words to explain our Christian concepts, normal words that a child will understand or normal words that someone without a Christian background will understand, let's ask ourselves if we should continue using them if we don't know what they mean, if we can't explain them using normal vocabulary, as it were.
Karla, thank you for taking some time to share your excitement and your words and your biking experience with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to rant in front of a whole big audience about the things I'm passionate about.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.